questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Given that the government has now voted to support the establishment of a National Integrity Commission, what is the Prime Minister's timetable to establish a National Integrity Commission? And will he work with all sides across the parliament to make the National Integrity Commission a reality as soon as possible?
The Attorney-General.
So, Mr. Speaker, Australia has ranked very low. Mr. Speaker, Australia has ranked consistently low as a corruption jurisdiction, and in fact we maintain precisely the same arrangements as most countries that rank low as a corruption jurisdiction. We have what is known as a multi-agency approach, with different specialised agencies responding to integrity and conduct issues in different parts of the public sector. Now, that multi-agency approach has proven here and overseas to be very successful. Agencies such as ACLI, the Public Sector Commissioner, the Inspector-General of Taxation, Inspector-General of Intelligence and Security, the AFP, ACIC, Auditor-General, the Independent Parliamentary Expenses Authority, which we, by the way, created, work together very well. There is clearly, and which we have acknowledged today and continue to acknowledge, a very live question as to how to improve on that system and whether scrapping it for a completely singular model of an Integrity Commissioner is the best way to go, or whether there should be consolidation and the creation of a new umbrella model. We are considering that. We are doing it in a dutiful and cautious way. But I might just note, Mr. Speaker, for all of the grandstanding from members opposite, would it surprise members on this side of the House that members opposite have not themselves always supported an Integrity Commissioner? And in fact, the member for Isaacs, I hear, interject, because he knows what's coming, I suspect. The member for Isaacs was asked this question, whether he agreed with a model of a National Integrity Commissioner, and he said, "I'm not convinced that there is a need for yet another integrity officer." Now, the context of that is very, very interesting, because that question and answer was put in the same press conference where the member for Isaacs was under pressure for wrongly claiming travel entitlement for a skiing trip. And so the questions went like this. We had a question about the travel claims issue. The member for Isaacs said we should not have claimed for the 2 nights because I went to Perisher to ski. Then we had the next question. Do you agree with a National Integrity Commissioner? And the next answer was, I'm not convinced that there's a need for yet another integrity officer. The member for Isaacs and the Leader of the Opposition are questioning our commitment to improved arrangements. The member for Isaacs is literally a fair-weather friend of Integrity Commissioners. When the snow is falling, he's against them. When the sun is shining, he is for them. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm remembered of Banjo Patterson. Let us saddle up and go, back to support the Commissioner, but only at the melting of the snow.
Members on both sides, just before I call the member for Ford, member for McEwen, the Leader of the House, I'd like to inform the House that we have joining us in the gallery this afternoon former Speaker and former member for Mackellar and indeed former Senator, the Honourable Bronwyn Bishop. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you today. The member for Ford.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the government is acting to build a stronger economy and why this is important to guarantee the essential services Australians rely on? And will the Prime Minister outline the risks to our strong economy?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Ford for his question. He understands, like everyone on this side of the House, that it is a strong economy that is necessary to deliver the essential services that Australians rely on. That's how it actually occurs.
Member for Wakefield.
A strong economy is not something you put on the shelf and admire from a distance as some sort of achievement, Mr. Speaker. It is a strong economy that delivers for Medicare. It's a strong economy that delivers for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It's a strong economy that has enabled this government to increase hospitals funding by 50% since 2012-13, Mr Speaker. It is a strong economy that is what guarantees the services and the infrastructure and supports that Australians rely on from their governments at both the Commonwealth and at a state level. And under our economic management over the last 5 years, Mr Speaker, that economy is stronger. And under our plans for the economy into the future, it will be stronger. Under our economic management, unemployment has fallen to 5%. There are 50,000 fewer people unemployed today than there were at the last election, as we promised. We've had record jobs in growth, and in particular the strongest growth in youth employment in Australia's economic history, with more than 100,000 young people getting a job in the previous 12 months, Mr Speaker, to the year ending the 30th of June. 1.2 million Australians have got a job since we were first elected, and on top of that, female participation in the workforce is at record highs, Mr Speaker. The gender pay gap has been reduced under the policies of our government by driving the economy forward, Mr Speaker. We have companies doing better in this country as a result of the environment for them to invest and employ people, and we've got a budget coming back into balance in 2019-20, Mr Speaker, a budget that only this government could have been able to deliver following the financial wreckage of those opposite and the wreckage they left us when they were last in government. And that has enabled us to deliver the health services, the roads, the water infrastructure, the support for our farmers to respond to the drought in our rural and regional communities, to ensure we've been able to support our veterans, that we can support the affordable medicines because we have the money in the budget, because we are running a stronger economy. And it's no accident, because our policies have been about lower taxes for businesses and households, taxes and relief that have been delivered and legislated by our government, infrastructure delivered, being built, rolled out over the next 10 years as well, $75 billion worth, ensuring that we're diversifying our economy and we're opening up new markets. But the sort of revolution that the Leader of the Labor Party wants to bring about in changing everything about our economies, how it is managed. Higher taxes, Mr Speaker. Big change for our economy if the Labor leader is elected. Big change that Australia can't afford.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Given that the government has voted today to support the establishment of a National Integrity Commission, does the government actually support a National Integrity Commission? Yes or no?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I refer the Leader of the Opposition to the answer given by the Attorney-General. The government has already been working on these matters for several months, and we are following our process through the cabinet process, and that's how things should be done. Now, we're not going to engage in half-baked ideas from the opposition, whether it's what they're throwing around in this chamber or whether it's their new pink batteries claim, Mr Speaker. We remember pink bats, now we've got pink batteries, Mr Speaker. That's what we've got from a Leader of the Opposition and a Labor Party who have learnt nothing during their time in opposition. All the failures of when they were last in government, Mr Speaker, it's just a distant memory to them, and they haven't learned a thing. They haven't learned that if
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Point of order on direct relevance. The question was very specific. Does the Prime Minister and the government support a National Integrity Commission? Yes or no?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I had addressed the question. I said the government has a cabinet process to deal with this measure in a way that is prudent, that is responsible, and that works through all the unintended consequences, and make sure that we have a process that doesn't go around and vilifying people who work for the public sector, whether they be journalists or public officials or anyone else. We have a calm, considered and mature approach to this issue, Mr Speaker. Now,
Members on my left.
The sort of wreckage and failed policies we saw of the Labor Party when they were last office, which went from everything from cash for clunkers to burning people's roofs down, Mr Speaker. We remember Labor's abominable failures when they were last in government, and so do the Australian people. They will wreak havoc on our economy. They will bring great changes to our economy that will put the strength of our economy at risk, whether it's $200 billion in higher taxes or taking our industrial relations system back to the 1970s, Mr Speaker. Under the Labor Party's industrial relations policies, you'll need long hair and flares, Mr Speaker, because that's where they want to take industrial relations in this country, back to the days of conflict and division. You cannot lead a country that you only seek to divide. That's the Leader of the Opposition's plan.
The member for Brisbane.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how our government's economic policies are helping small businesses to grow and prosper, including in my electorate of Brisbane? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative approaches that could harm this prosperity?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Brisbane for his question. And he strongly supports the more than 30,000 small businesses across his electorate, understanding that small business is the backbone of the Australian economy, Mr Speaker. 3.3 million small businesses employing around 70% of the private sector workforce and providing more than $300 billion a year in wages and salaries. And I had the pleasure of last week visiting the member for Brisbane's electorate, Clayfield Seafood Market, with Nick there and his 30 staff, including apprentices. And he was benefiting out of Liberal and national government policy, Mr Speaker, including the $20,000 instant asset write-off, which enabled him to purchase more equipment for his kitchen, Mr Speaker. Like our tax cuts for 3.3 million small businesses, our $300 million reduction in red tape, Mr Speaker, our expansion of the employee share ownership schemes to give people a stake in their government's growth story, Mr Speaker. And the Prime Minister announced a change to payment terms to stop big business or government using small business as a bank, Mr Speaker. And we will be the lead. We will be the lead. We'll ensure that all invoices under $1 million will be paid from the government within 20 days, Mr Speaker. That's our commitment. We're looking for the states to follow suit, and we want big business to also do so, Mr Speaker. And another major announcement that we made since the parliament has come back today is that we've announced a $2 billion fund to increase small business access to finance, Mr Speaker, to avoid a market failure, to enable smaller lenders and smaller banks to be able to provide more liquidity, more competitive terms to small business, as well as a business growth fund, Mr Speaker, which will be absolutely critical in ensuring banks and other lenders can take passive equity stakes in small businesses if that is what the small business wants. Now, Mr Speaker, at the end of the day, the Labor Party doesn't care about small business. And you know why? Because it doesn't have a unionised workforce, Mr Speaker. That's the reality. The Labor Party ignores small business. We on this side of the House support small business. They are the farmers. They are the professionals. They are the tradespeople. They are the retailers, Mr Speaker. They are the backbone of the Australian economy. So their philosophical outlook is consistent with the Liberal and National Party's philosophical outlook, and we have put in place policies which ensuring that small businesses are growing and employing more Australians.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why did the government vote today to support a National Integrity Commission if it still hasn't decided whether it wants one?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the government is considering its position through a normal cabinet process. When it comes to
Members
these
on my
issues,
left.
this is what
Members on my
responsible
left.
governments do.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
We are not opposed to measures which add and lift the integrity of the way government is administered in this country, and so we do not remain closed to those options, and we'll be considering a range of options about what is the best way to go forward. But it says something about this Leader of the Opposition Mr Speaker, that of the issues that he wants to bring into this chamber, that when it comes to families and small businesses that are struggling to deal with getting access to finance, or families that are dealing with electricity prices, that the issues that he wants to raise, Mr Speaker, don't relate to these. He doesn't want to come in here and talk about what is already his failed Big Patries policy, Mr Speaker, just a reheat of the failed policies of what was happening last time when they were in government. He doesn't want to come here and talk about or explain or ask questions about what would be the impact of putting a 45% reckless target on emissions reduction, which would, Mr Speaker, put in place a carbon price 10 times worse than the carbon tax that we had to abolish when we came to government. He doesn't want to talk about the higher subsidies that he wants to give to big electricity companies paid for by Australians who will have to pay higher taxes as a result of what the Leader of the Opposition wants to inflict on the Australian economy. While the Leader of the Opposition is off on some sort of fringe issue, Mr Speaker, what we're focused on, Mr Speaker, is the strength of our economy, because that's what delivers the services, Medicare, disability insurance, support for veterans, Defence Force support. That's what delivers it. The Leader of the Opposition likes to come in and talk about anything under the sun other than what makes an economy stronger, because when it comes to managing the economy, the Leader of the Opposition has no clue. What he plans to do for the economy is bring in the wrecking ball of a big change, a chaotic change, policies that will disrupt the smooth running of our economy, that will put Medicare at risk, that will put hospital funding at risk, that will put education funding and schools funding, just like it did when they had to not list affordable medicines because they'd run out of money because they'd spent it all, Mr Speaker. You cannot trust Labor on the economy, and that's why you cannot trust them on Medicare, schools and hospitals.
Members on both sides. The member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This Friday, many thousands of students across the country will go on strike from school, calling for emergency action on climate change. These brave and courageous kids are joining young people around the world who are angry at the failure of governments, including yours, to secure their future.
Member for Melbourne will pause. The Deputy Prime Minister will cease interject. Don't have any hesitation. I'll take action if I'm ignored. The member for Melbourne will begin his question again.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This Friday, many thousands of students across the country will go on strike from school, calling for emergency action on climate change. These brave and courageous kids are joining young people around the world who are angry at the failure of governments, including yours, to secure their future from global warming. Prime Minister, will you join me in praising these students for having a go? And will you meet with and listen to these kids who are demanding action from your government to keep coal in the ground?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, climate change is a very real and serious issue which demands the attention of governments at all levels, and it has the attention of this government through the Emissions Reduction Fund, the Renewable Energy Target, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, our Snowy 2.0 initiative and energy efficiency measures, our commitment to 26% of emissions reduction target, which we remain committed to. We're committed to all of these things. But I'll tell you what we're also committed to. Kids should go to school. That's what we're committed to. We don't support the idea of kids not going to school to participate in things that can be dealt with outside of school. Each day I send my kids to school, and I know other members' kids should also go to school. But we do not support our schools being turned into parliaments, Mr Speaker. We think kids should be in school learning about whether it's those issues, maths, science, English, literature, Indigenous history, Australian history, Mr Speaker. That's what they should be there doing. And so what we want is more learning in schools and less activism in schools.
Just before I call the member for Robertson, I'd like to inform the House have joining us in the gallery this afternoon a parliamentary delegation from Poland, accompanied by the Ambassador. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you all. The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the government is ensuring the economic security of all Australians, particularly older Australians in my electorate of Robertson, who have saved for their retirement? And is the Treasurer aware of any higher taxing alternatives?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for her question, and know that she supports a strong economy, Mr Speaker, because a strong economy provides the services and the support for our senior Australians, including in her electorate of Robertson, Mr Speaker. And the Australian economy is growing strongly. 3.4% growth through the year, its fastest rate since the height of the mining boom. Unemployment falling to 5%, its lowest rate since 2012. Wages starting to rise as the Reserve Bank of Australia predicted, with its biggest jump in 3 years. Australia's AAA credit rating reaffirmed by the leading rating agencies, and a budget that is on track to come back to balance. Mr Speaker, that doesn't happen by accident. The Australian economy doesn't operate by autopilot. It's been the difficult, hard decisions that the Liberal and National parties in government have taken, Mr Speaker. And this is enabling us to support senior Australians through the pension work bonus that allows them to keep the pension but also to earn up to $300 extra a fortnight, Mr Speaker, by allowing senior Australians to downsize their home and put additional money into super, Mr Speaker. That is what we are doing to support senior Australians. But those opposite have a different plan for retirees and senior Australians. They have a plan to increase their taxes, Mr Speaker. A new retirees tax, a $45 billion tax grab from Australian retirees, Mr Speaker. 900,000 individuals will be worse off as a result of Labor's policy. 200,000 self-managed super funds, and the holders of those will be worse off, Mr Speaker, as a result of Labor's policy. On average, if you've got a self-managed super fund, you'll be $12,000 worse off under Labor's policy. If you're an individual with these franking credits, you'll be $2,200 a year worse off as a result of Labor's policy. And you know what's more? 84% of those people who are currently getting the benefits of those franked dividends have a taxable income under $37,000. Under $37,000. Now, there are 300,000 of those people in Labor-held electorates. What about the 8,000 in the seat of Canberra, the 7,900 in Jagga, the 7,600 in Melbourne Ports, the 7,400 in Cunningham, Mr Speaker? They're all going to be worse off as a result of Labor's policy. Now, Simon Crean, who was then the shadow Treasury spokesman for Labor, said of the government's changes back in 2000 that it improves the tax situation faced by low-income investors. These people have now been ignored by the Labor Party and left out of the benefits that they should enjoy.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. As the Prime Minister believes that a National Integrity Commission is a fringe issue, why has he told the House today that his government has been working on it for months? And actually,
Leader of the House.
Why did his government vote for a National Integrity Commission today if he thinks it's a fringe issue?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. This is a government that is able to deal with many issues, Mr Speaker. Many issues.
Members on my left.
So we'll continue to cover the field, Mr Speaker, in the interests of all Australians. What's quite clear is we're yet to see a policy from those opposite that would do anything useful to the economy. And as a result, Mr Speaker, that's why Australians do not trust this Leader of the Opposition. We see it. It's been 5 years now, Mr Speaker. It's been 5 years they've had a good look at this Leader of the Opposition, and after 5 years, They're not buying, Mr Speaker.
Member for
They're not
Lyons.
buying this Leader of the Opposition because they know they cannot trust the Leader of the Labor Party to run a strong economy.
The member for Flynn has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Minister update the House on how a strong economy allows the government to build better water infrastructure and backing our farmers and helping regional Australia grow? What are the risks for farmers from different approaches? Thank you.
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Picture this. Last Monday, the member for Flynn and I were there at a press conference, and in the background there was the beautiful harbour at Gladstone. What a busy and industrious place that is. There were ships there, cranes there, workers in high-vis there.
Member for McEwen
It was a
will
picture
cease
to
interjecting.
behold. An absolute picture to behold. And we, the Liberals and Nationals, want to make it even a busier harbour. We want to make it an even more industrious port. That's why, at that press conference, we announced $500 million additional money, $500 million extra money into the National Water Infrastructure Development Fund. And the previous day, the member for Flynn and I were on a red, rocky, windswept ridge at Emerald. Yes, picture this. Picture this. I'm giving you a great picture of what it was like. And there we were with Alan Stensmith. We were turning the first sod for a wonderful project, an inland port, taking in those rail and road logistics. What a wonderful project that will be. And, Mr Speaker, the Minister for Agriculture, the members of the National Party, the Libs, we all understand that to grow better food, more fibre, the very best in the world, all you need to do is add more water, and that's why we're investing in flood mitigation projects, investing in drought-proofing projects, investing in projects that is going to dam more water, store more water. This is so great for regional Australia. I know how on board the member for Flynn is. How on board. And of course the projects such as modernising the Fairburn Dam at Emerald, helping to examine agricultural opportunities in the Burnett. These things have been championed by the member for Flynn, the member for Wide Bay. We're getting on, we are delivering, and it's going to create more wealth, a better future and more jobs in regional Australia, but indeed it is good for the nation, and that's why we're getting on and we're doing it. I'm asked by the member for Flynn what are the things against this, and I see them right before me. They're not in favour, and I can hear the member for Hunter. Why would you be yelling out about something where we're investing $500 million in more water storage infrastructure? What would you have against that? I just don't understand that. And you know what? People in regional Australia don't understand why you're not in favour of those things either. They do not understand. We're getting on and we're building it. And you can point to the projects that we're getting on and building, such as the Rookwood Weir, and the member for Capricornia's electorate, $176.1 million, working with the Queensland Government. We're prepared to work with state governments that want to work with us. A Scottsdale irrigation scheme in Tasmania, $25.27 million. It's good investment. It's going to create more jobs, and you can do it because we've got a strong economy. That's when you can get on and build these things. When you've got a strong economy, you can do these things. You can build, you can develop, and you can increase wealth and prosperity and jobs.
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister voted against the Banking Royal Commission 26 times before claiming it was his idea. He supported the National Energy Guarantee before opposing it. Now he's voted for a National Integrity Commission without being able to say whether or not he supports it. How can Australians know when this Prime Minister is actually committed to something or if he's just pretending?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm not going to be lectured on integrity by the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. I'm not going to be lectured on integrity by the Labor Party. The party of Sam Dastyari, the party of Craig Thompson, the party of Eddie O'Beed, the party of Ian McDonald, the party of Joe Tripodi, the party of WA Inc., Mr Speaker. This is the only political party in Australia that can open up branches in prisons, Mr Speaker, because they've got enough people in them from being found convicted of actually corrupt conduct, Mr Speaker, which has spent them to prison. This is a Labor Party, Mr Speaker, that knows all about muck because they live their lives in it, Mr Speaker. That's the Labor Party that Australians have got to know over the last few decades, Mr Speaker, and more, whether it was Rex Jackson all those years ago, going all the way through to Eddie Obeid, Mr Speaker, and I hear the guffaws of the member for Watson. We always remember the Benzanese ski trip you had down at Eddie Obeid's place. We remember you going there going, oh, I just went there, we didn't really know, we're not that close, I just went down there to spend a bit of time at Eddie's place. Mr Speaker, the Labor Party, when it comes to integrity, give me a break. Give me a break.
Members on my left, the member for Gorton's already been warned. Member for Parramatta, the Treasurer. The member for Ryan has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Jobs, Industrial Relations and Women. Will the Minister please update the House on what action the government is taking to improve economic security for women, and what attitudes to economic management would undermine this success?
The Minister for Industrial Relations, Jobs and Women.
I thank the member for Ryan for her question. And she knows, like every member of this side of the chamber, that when women do well, their families do well. And when their families do well, our nation and our economy prospers. That is why the coalition government delivered last week the first Women's Economic Security Statement. It includes practical measures that focus on ensuring more participation for those that want to join the workforce, increasing women's earning potential and ensuring their greater economic independence. One such measure is the flexibility of the government-funded parental leave payment. We know that there are more than 2,300 families that miss out on the government-funded parental leave payment because of the lack of flexibility. It is too rigid right now. You can't say to all families you must only take it as 18 weeks. You should instead give them the flexibility to make decisions that are right for them and for their families, and that is precisely what we have done. In our measure, you can take 12 weeks up front, but the next 6 weeks you can take as blocks or as one day at a time. Now, this helps those women, particularly those women who are in charge and who run small businesses, allowing them to be able to return to work knowing that they have financial support behind them to make the decisions that are right for them and their families. And it builds on the government's achievements to date. It builds on the fact that we have seen more women in work than ever before and more women in full-time work than ever before. And as the Prime Minister quite rightly pointed out, under our government, we have seen a reduction in the gender pay gap, down from 17.2% under the previous Labor government to 14.5% under us. Still too large, but heading in the right direction. And sadly, those opposite simply pay lip service to women's economic security. They refuse to get on with practical measures that will actually support women in building their financial security. They should support the government's catch-up contributions when it comes to women's superannuation payments and tax deductions for those people, no matter who employs them, no matter how they're employed, being able to have a level playing field in achieving their financial security through their superannuation. But those opposite have said that they would in fact scrap them. They should stop the rorts and the rip-offs in the superannuation sector that would actually add $2.5 billion to women's economic security, but instead they are opposing them. And they, of course, have the mega retirees tax that would hurt women the most. 30% more women will be impacted by that regressive
The Minister's
tax.
time has concluded. The member for Grayndler. Member for Grayndler has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister, and I refer to various answers he has given in this chamber about why isn't Malcolm Turnbull still the Prime Minister of Australia? And if the Prime Minister won't tell Australians why he's got his current job, will he at least say why he was sacked from his role as Head of Tourism Australia by former Coalition Government Tourism Minister Fran Bailey in the Howard government?
Can I just say I'm not calling the Prime Minister straight away. I'm just pondering the relevance of the last part of that question. Needs to relate to the Prime Minister's responsibilities, not to... he wasn't then, no. Yeah. As generous as I am, I can't see that question being in order. The member for Dunkley. Sure.
Thank you.
Member for Dunkley,
Thank you,
resume
Mr.
his seat.
Speaker.
Member for Grindler.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
Member for Grindler on a point of
Thanks,
order.
Mr Speaker. On a point of order with regard to why the question was at least in part in order.
Yeah. No, hang on. Members on my right. Members on my right. I want to keep hearing the member for Grindler. I'm liking what I hear so far.
Because I was very conscious, Mr Speaker, of your role and the potential for a ruling from you, which is why it was framed in terms of referring to previous answers that he's given day after day after day when we've asked each and every day why he's there and not Malcolm Turnbull, and the question went to that.
I don't need you to go repeating every question you've asked. That's okay.
No, I'm just referring to the number of occasions in which it's been asked. And that part of the question is certainly in order, and I think he might want to have the opportunity to clear the air about the second part of why he lost his job.
Members on my right, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, on your ruling and the member for Grindler's point of order, you have previously said that questions that have a fig leaf of relevance, or in this case a small tree frond of relevance, should not therefore be in order when the rest of the question is quite clearly not in order and is really, in this case, designed to be a smear as opposed to a question.
That's right. I'm glad that the member for Grindler concedes that part of the question wasn't in order. And given that you've been generous in saying you're providing that opportunity, but given that a question's been framed that's partly deliberately not in order, I'm just not going to allow it. The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy. Will the Minister update the House on how the government's plan to lower power prices is supporting households and backing small business, including in my election of Dunkley? Is the Minister aware of the impact of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for his question. And he knows that this company's priority when it comes to energy policy is getting electricity prices down while we keep the lights on. That's why we're cracking down on the big energy companies' rip-offs. It's why we're creating a price safety net for customers, and it's why we're underwriting new, reliable 24/7 generation and pressuring energy retailers to make sure they have the supply in place years ahead of time to meet demand. Now, Mr Speaker, our pressure on energy companies is already yielding results. Our pressure is already yielding results, and we've seen that AGL will protect customers on standing offers by implementing a price safety net from January 1. Which means more than 150,000 families and 27,000 small businesses will be better off. 150,000 households and 27,000 small businesses will get a better deal. Across Victoria and New South Wales, standing offer customers will get 10% price cuts, Mr Speaker, with similarly large price cuts in other states. Mr Speaker, this shows that our policies are working. We're already yielding results. We've also seen interventions in gas networks with prices down by up to 50%. We're reining in the powers of the power of the network companies. And, Mr Speaker, if Labor had done this earlier, they would have saved Australian households $6 billion. $6 billion you left on the table for Australian households. Now, Mr Speaker,
Member for Shortland.
The member asked about alternatives. The Labor Party's reckless 45% emissions reduction target will be a wrecking ball through our economy. It will hurt our manufacturing sector, our agricultural sector. It will hurt our smelters, our refineries, our farmers and our transport industry, Mr Speaker. Which industry does the Leader of the Opposition want to shut down first? Is it aluminium smelting? Is it refining? Is it cement factories? Is it fertiliser factories? Is it the beef industry? Which regions does he want to shut down first? Is it Gladstone? The member for Flynn might have something to say about that. Is it Portland? The member for Warren might have something to say about that. Is it Tomago? Well, the member for Patterson should have something to say about that. Meanwhile, those opposite are sitting on the side of the big energy companies, throwing $15 billion worth of subsidies at the big energy companies, while they refuse to support us on legislation to crack down on dodgy practices which they haven't even seen. We sit on the side of energy consumers, you sit on the side of the energy companies.
The member for CORIO.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On Saturday, the people of Victoria rejected the Liberal Party's record on cuts to schools, hospital and infrastructure. What lessons has the federal government learnt from Victoria?
The members on my right, the member for Corangamite is preventing the Prime Minister getting the call. Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, they're very cocky over there today, aren't they? They're very cocky. Very, very cocky. The Leader of the Opposition's got that cocky swagger again as he's walking around. The unions, they're feeling pretty cocky too, Mr Speaker, about what they'll be able to get the Leader of the Opposition to do if he ever occupies this side of the House, Mr Speaker. I congratulate the Premier of Victoria on his election. I said so on the night.
Members on my left.
I texted him on the night and I congratulated him, Mr Speaker. And I'll tell you why I did. Because in Victoria, an incumbent Premier who has been presiding over a strong economy, which has enabled him to deliver services and infrastructure, which the people of Victoria have clearly respected. Mr Speaker, a Premier who was favoured to his opponent has been re-elected in Victoria. An incumbent government running a strong economy with a preferred Premier, Mr Speaker, and delivering services and infrastructure for the people they're intended to serve. Now, who does that sound like, Mr Speaker? Who does that sound like? Our government, Mr Speaker, is running a strong economy.
Members on my left.
Our government is delivering infrastructure and services that the Australian people respect and want more of, Mr Speaker. And our government has a plan to continue to that. And as you listen to the jeers and the guffaws of an arrogant and out-of-touch opposition, they put the queue in the rack, they think they're already there, they think they can do whatever they want. And I'll never forget what Peter Garrett said back before the 2007 election. We all remember it, while they were all trying to pretend there wouldn't be anything dramatic, that you would just be John Howard Light if Kevin Rudd was elected. Peter Garrett let the cat out of the bag when he said, "We'll change it all." That's what the Leader of the Opposition's plan is. That's what the Labor Party's plan is. They want to change it all, Mr Speaker, and that means the economy. That means the very things that Australians depend on for their jobs, their livelihoods. You won't hear from the opposition plans to support small and family businesses. You won't hear plans to ensure that we boost female workforce participation in this country, Mr Speaker. You won't hear that. What you'll hear from the Labor Party is taking the lawbreakers in the union movement and turning to lawmakers on their very benches, Mr Speaker. This is a cocky and arrogant Leader of the Labor Party who thinks the job is already done. That's not our view. We will fight him every day to the next election because he will destroy our economy.
The member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister update the House on how the government's strong economic management allows us to protect our servicemen and women through investments in the capabilities they need, and what might different approaches put this investment at risk?
The Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Grey for his question. In the last few weeks, we've made some very significant announcements and begun some very important projects in the defence industry and the defence sector, Mr Speaker. For example, a couple of weeks ago, we began construction of the offshore patrol vessels at Osborne, the Arafura class. 12 offshore patrol vessels, the first 2 to be built at Osborne and Adelaide, the next 10 to be built at Henderson in Western Australia. A $3.5 to $4 billion project, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister cut steel at Henderson about 6 weeks ago, and about a fortnight ago we began construction of the first of the offshore patrol vessels at Osborne in South Australia. A couple of Fridays ago, Mr Speaker, I travelled out to Edinburgh and announced that we would acquire 12 to 16 Reaper unmanned piloted aircraft, UAVs, weaponised, to give us the capability to take out targets on the ground from 7 kilometres in the air, protecting our servicemen and women from danger at a cost of $1 to $2 billion. In the last month, we opened the bricks and mortar that represents the Naval Shipbuilding College at Osborne, a spoke and hub college that will use all the resources available to us around Australia to create the skilled workforce that we need, the thousands and thousands of workers that will be needed from tradesmen right through to engineers because of this government's investments in the shipbuilding and submarine building projects of the future. So we are investing in the capability for the largest build-up of our military in our peacetime history, Mr Speaker. And why are we able to do that? Why are we able to invest $200 billion in our military capability build-up across our nation? Because of our management of the budget and our management of the economy. If you don't have a growing economy, bringing in the revenues, if you don't manage your budget in the way that we have been doing in the last 5 years, where we have slowed the rate of growth of spending that existed under the Labor Party, you would not be able to invest in this major military capability build-up, Mr Speaker. And we know what happened last time that Labor got into office in 2007, Mr Speaker. We know what happened last time. The first casualty of their spending cuts to fund their profligate programs was defence, Mr Speaker. They saw defence as a honeypot where they could go and cut constantly, even to the point that we had our lowest spending on our defence since 1938, the lowest level since the last year of appeasement, Mr Speaker. It was the lowest level under Labor,
Minister's
the highest
time has
level
concluded.
under
The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister tell the parliament more about how Saturday was such a ringing endorsement of his government's policies?
Members on my left. Members on my left. The Prime Minister has the call.
Again, Mr Speaker, all I note is the hubris and the arrogance of the Labor Party. Premier Andrews won the election in Victoria, not you. That's who won the election in Victoria. Premier Andrews won the election in Victoria. We have worked with Premier Andrews after the last number of years, Mr Speaker, and we have our differences, but there's no doubt that at the election on the weekend they chose to return the incumbent government of Victoria. And I congratulate Premier Andrews on that result. Why wouldn't you, Mr Speaker? That is a significant achievement with an increased majority. In Victoria, unemployment is at 4.5%. That is lower than the national average, Mr Speaker. In Victoria, we have been delivering with the Victorian government record investments in infrastructure, Mr Speaker. We have, Mr Speaker. We have been
the
working
Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker. So,
the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
I've got news
Prime
for
Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is warned. Someone had to be first. The member for Wakefield will leave under 94A. The Prime Minister has the call.
It was the same when the Premier of Tasmania, when Will Hodgman was re-elected in Tasmania. It was the same when Premier Palaszczuk was re-elected in Queensland. People elected not to change their governments in each of those states. In South Australia, they did choose to make the change. So what is the Labor Party saying about that at a federal level? The truth is, Mr Speaker, if you want to win an election at a federal level, there's no state premier on the ballot, Mr Speaker. They are the members who sit in this House. And you can't go around relying on the achievements of a state government to prop up the failed policies of federal Labor, Mr Speaker. At this next election, there will be a choice. There will be a choice between the Liberal Party and the National parties, who stand for a stronger economy and who have the proven track record on keeping Australians safe. On the other side, Mr Speaker, you'll have an opposition, a Labor Party which wants to put $200 billion of higher taxes on people's jobs, on their savings, on their incomes, on their retirement, Mr Speaker, and throw a big wet blanket on the economy which puts Medicare, disability services, affordable medicines, all of that at risk. There will be a choice at the next election, and it won't be involving any premier of any of the states. It'll be between me and you.
The member for Boothby. The members on my left, the member for McEwen. The member for Boothby has the floor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Cities, Urban Infrastructure and Population. Will the Minister update the House on the progress of the government's city deals and how they are bringing together local and state governments to unlock the potential of cities around Australia? Are there any alternative opinions that would jeopardise this progress?
The Minister for Cities has the call.
Well, can I thank the member for Boothby for her question and also for her commitment to the Adelaide City deal. And indeed, only just last Thursday I was in Adelaide, where I met with the Premier and the local mayors to discuss what the shape of an Adelaide City deal might look like, and we hope to sign that deal within the next few months. Mr Speaker, in the last 4 weeks, since the last sitting week in Parliament, we've rapidly progressed the government's city deal agenda. And as members would know, these deals are agreements with all 3 levels of government to make our cities more livable and to turbocharge local economies. We've already signed 3 city deals and indeed are implementing those 3. They had been Townsville, Launceston and the massive Western Sydney city deal, which is centred around the Western Sydney Airport, which we are building. And in the last 4 weeks, Mr Speaker, we've signed 2 more city deals. First, the Prime Minister joins myself and the member for Corangamite and the member for Wannon in signing the Geelong, or announcing our commitment to the Geelong City deal, which is a $154 million commitment to support the tourism economy in Geelong and all the way along the Great Ocean Road. And as members might not appreciate, outside of Melbourne, the Great Ocean Road in Geelong is actually the most visited part of Australia from a tourism perspective, but a lot of that infrastructure does need to be upgraded. And so we have made this huge investment and consequently will be completely rebuilding a new visitor centre precinct at the 12 Apostles. There will also be a redevelopment of the public spaces in Lorne and Apollo Bay and at Skeens Creek, a brand new tourism walks along the Great Ocean Road, a new convention centre in the heart of Geelong and so many other things. This, Mr Speaker, was a deal that the Victorian Chamber of Commerce said will boost business, boost tourism and boost jobs, and that is exactly right. We then, Mr Speaker, went up to Darwin, where the Prime Minister, the Chief Minister and the Darwin Lord Mayor signed the Darwin City deal, which is a $200 million 10-year commitment to revitalise the CBD of Darwin. And our major commitment there is a huge investment to create a brand new university precinct in the heart of the CBD for 11,000 students to be there in the centre of the CBD, to study there and to therefore spill out onto the streets and purchase things at the local restaurants and businesses. There's also green spaces, an Indigenous precinct, a new art gallery, the redevelopment of the harbour foreshore precinct and so many other things again, Mr Speaker. This is a fantastic deal as well. We'll soon be announcing the Hobart City deal too. And I'm asked about alternatives. Well, of all the work which the Labor Party has done, their main big development in the City deal precincts is to change the name from City deal to City partnership.
Time has concluded. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Thank the Prime Minister.